Okay, I'm here with Jonathan Reutenberg, and I'm here to discuss some quirky races all around the country. Jonathan is our resident politics expert, and he knows all the ins and outs of American politics. I don't know why, but we'll find out a little bit more about that later. I'm Joe Reynolds. I'm a failed Senate candidate. This is Jonathan's pod, but I'm going to ask him the questions because he's the guy who has the inside knowledge, and he's kind of an inside baseball kind of guy when it comes to these political races. And how you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm doing great. I just got to say, I'm not sure if I'm an expert, but I can give as much information as I possibly can.
I'm
Uh,
I'm sure you know more than a lot of us, and I'm sure we'd welcome all the information that you have.
oh, for sure, for sure. So, well, let's start things off.
Do you want to go straight to this Georgia race, because I know this Georgia race is on your mind? There's a Georgia Congress race with a person who is a QAnon follower, and this isn't just someone who once tweeted about it and renounced it. She's apparently not renounced these views. And can you tell me a little bit about QAnon, because people may be unfamiliar with it, and tell me about this candidate and her chances and what it says about a trend for these types of candidates?
Well, I could talk for hours about this race in Georgia. So, the first part of your question is, what is QAnon? And the answer to that is, it's an idea that originated on, of all places, 4chan in October of 2017. 4chan is basically a forum for the alt-right. It's essentially it's morphed into that. But someone on that forum named Q. That's what their username was. They posted saying that they had inside information about Donald Trump and his political opponents, and essentially what the conspiracy is that he claims to have proof that Democratic politicians, liberal elites in the media and in Hollywood, and because no conspiracy theory would be complete without the Jews, George Soros, we're all in cahoots in an international child sex trafficking ring. And I just want to let you know, I researched this on Wikipedia for a few minutes, and I think I got dumber as a result of that.
No doubt.
And and Trump basically, according to this guy, feigned collusion with Russia in order to team up with Robert Mueller to expose this ring, send all of these elites to jail and to Guantanamo Bay, and have the military take over the country, and a utopia results. So if you're wondering, huh? Or the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt the same way. But why is this relevant to this race? Well, because the person who might be the front runner for a House seat in Georgia, in northwestern Georgia, is a woman named Marjorie Greene, a businesswoman who is a firm believer in this conspiracy theory. And she has not renounced this view or many other views. And you're wondering, what do you mean, many other views? Well, she has also ran ads telling Antifa protesters to, quote, stay out of northern Georgia while holding, of all things, a gun, and not just any gun, an AR-15. And she posed with a photo with Chester Doles, who is a former leader of the KKK, of the local KKK, and who spent time in prison for nearly beating to death a black man who was caught spending time with a white woman. She has posted videos on her YouTube channel or on her Facebook page, which were on her Facebook page as recently as last year, talking about an Islamic invasion of government in response to the election of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who themselves, by the way, are their own separate problems, but nothing to do with their religion. She claims that in Islamic countries, men can have sex with children and multiple wives and can marry as many women as they want, including their cousins. She basically said black people are slaves to Democrats, and said that if she were black, she would be proud to see a Confederate monument. She said George Soros is a Nazi who tried to turn in Jews to the Nazis. And by the way, that is nothing new. This slanderous thing about George Soros has been said by numerous people, including the dictator of Hungary, Viktor Orban. He's really the one who started all that. And right-wing politicians around the world have basically copied that tactic. And to be clear, you can criticize George Soros for funding left-wing for causes, but some of the things I've heard right-wingers say about him are outlandish, and I just gave you one of them. And the reason why, and there's plenty more where that came from. She even said that Black Lives Matter are like the Nazis who marched in Charlottesville. And I could go on and on and on and on and on. She has been denounced, by the way, by the leaders in that House of Representatives, including Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise and Liz Cheney. But members of the House Freedom Caucus still support her. She placed first in the primary, and if she wins the runoff, she's facing a runoff, by the way, with John Cohen, who's a neurosurgeon, who's also a right-wing conservative, but is not the nut that Green is. But if she wins the runoff, she is almost certain to be the next congresswoman from this district. It's an open seat that was opened up because of incumbent Tom Graves retiring. It's a heavily rural district, but it does contain some of the exurbs of Atlanta, as well as some of the suburbs of Chattanooga, as well as small cities in between that. Trump got 75% of the vote here. And so Democrats have nothing going for them in this district. So whoever wins the runoff is going to be the next congresswoman. And after we ousted Steve King in the Republican primary in Iowa, I have no interest in seeing someone like Marjorie Greene get into Congress. We've taken out one racist. We don't need another one. And so if you are a Republican living in Georgia's 14th, or even if you're a Democrat, switch the Republicans and please vote for John Cohen. You might not agree with him on everything, but nobody wants to see Marjorie Greene, a QAnon nut, get into Congress. And we all have a responsibility to support John Cohen, to vote for him if you live there, to donate that to him if you're an American, and do everything to make sure that that woman does not get into Congress. Enough is enough.
Now she hasn't renounced these views, and obviously she's a Republican, and there are obviously a lot of people that are sympathetic to this type of behavior. Now, I remember a Congressman Massey from Tennessee, I believe, libertarian, had a quote before the Trump election saying, well, I couldn't understand why all the libertarians were now voting for Trump, but then I realized they're just trying to vote for the craziest person in the room, and Trump wins that hands down. Now we have this individual who's even crazier. Is this a trend we see in GOP politics? I mean, we might even segue to the Virginia race if you want, from this QAnon follower.
Right. I mean, there have been a number of instances of crazy people winning the Republican nominations in various places, including many current congressmen, including Paul Gosar is one of them. He is ardent Trump supporter and has said a number of crazy things. He basically fits the mold of Marjorie Greene in many ways. He does actually face a primary challenger, and in Anne Marie Ward. It's not entirely
this is Arizona, right?
This is in Arizona's 4th. Yeah, it's not entirely clear whether or not he'll lose, because the thing that Steve King had not going for him that Paul Gosar does is the fact that he's still on committees. And that was the thing that Randy Feenstra was able to utilize to make Steve King a vulnerable incumbent. And you also had in 2018 Corey Stewart, who is a Confederophile, winning the Republican nomination for the Senate, losing to Tim Kaine, the Democrat, by 16 points, and probably sinking about 3 Republican congressmen and women as a result of that.
Now, if I remember Corey Stewart, he wasn't always this way. Did he just detect a trend and jump on this Confederate bandwagon, or was he always this underneath?
I mean, he was the chair for 16 years of Prince William County, which has become a very blue county in Northern Virginia. But even as recently as 2015, he was reelected. So I guess I'm not entirely sure. I can certainly say that it's only in 2017 I started noticing him saying these things. But I honestly would like to hope back to an earlier point that if someone like Randy Feenstra can beat an incumbent like Steve King, it gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, there is a line in Republican politics that even the craziest people will not cross. And when I see someone like Randy Feenstra beat someone like Steve King, it gives me hope that maybe that line is in a better position than I thought it was.
Do you think that the leadership in Congress has influence over the grassroots party activists? Because sometimes I'm wondering whether the tail wags the dog there.
Right, and it's oftentimes that House leadership and the president himself can clash. For example, Trump did congratulate Marjorie Greene on placing first in the runoff, which might give her a competitive advantage. But that was before some of the videos became to public light. Although we knew plenty about her beforehand, that in my opinion should have made her disqualifying. But also at times, House leadership or Senate leadership in this case and the president can be on the same side, like in the Alabama Senate race in the special election in 2017, when they both endorsed Luther Strange, who was appointed by the governor of Alabama to replace Jeff Sessions. Both the Senate leadership and Trump endorsed Luther Strange, and the party leadership bucked both of them in choosing Roy Moore. And I definitely love to talk about the Alabama Senate race at a later point.
Well, let's segue from Georgia and the Green race to what happened to this Congressman Denver Riggleman in Virginia, which seems almost of a similar bent. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So Virginia's 5th is an interesting district. It elected blue dog Democrats for a long time, but has since become a Republican district. And interestingly enough, in the last 10 years, this district is going to see 4 open races, meaning races where there are no incumbent. Actually, I'm sorry, that's a bit of a misstatement. They're actually going to see 3 one-term congressmen. There was Tom Perriello, the Democrat who won in 2008, who was an ardent Obama supporter and lost in 2010. And then there was a Republican incumbent from 2017, 2018 who ran into legal issues, who announced he was not going to run for re-election, and that is where Denver Riggleman, the current congressman, came in. He's a rather interesting person. He has a more libertarian bent. But he's, for example, he's also a very interesting personality. He was alleged to have involvement in writing Bigfoot literature. But he did win in 2018 by a 7-point margin, which is notable because Corey Stewart only won this district by 2.5%, while Trump in 2016 carried it by 12%. So, but Riggleman was an interesting fit for the district because the Republicans there are socially conservative. His main offense was not bucking the president. He has supported the president and has voted in line with him more than 90% of the time. His main offense was officiating a gay wedding between 2 of his staffers. And for that, he was attacked by a challenger, Bob Good. Now, interestingly enough, Trump endorsed the incumbent, Riggleman, and he was also endorsed by Jerry Falwell Jr. But that was not enough for I wouldn't say the voters of Virginia's 5th, because the Republicans actually didn't hold a primary. They held a convention, and the delegates of the convention, I think less than 5,000 people even voted there, and they basically picked this guy who made campaign donations to the delegates, and they picked him because he had the support of those who were allowed to vote. And I personally think that had a primary been held, Riggleman would have come up on top. Now, it's not entirely clear how this district is going to go. It was a Trump plus 11 or 12 district. It's still very to the right, and Democrats have not yet picked their nominee. They're going to pick it in the primary this coming Tuesday. So it's not entirely clear how this race is going to turn out, but it is clear this race became more competitive because of the decision that Republican delegates made.
But it's not a toss-up. It's still a lean right, you think?
Right. But I would also say that this could also have ramifications, be far beyond this district, because, although the country is becoming more accepting of things like same-sex marriage and gay rights, most Republicans my age are firmly supportive of same-sex marriage. And the message that I think this sends to many young Republicans and Americans in general is that Republicans have taken several steps backward on the issue of gay rights, and I just worry that that's the implication that that's going to have going forward, because Republicans who are conservative, who are against gay rights, are right now on the losing side of the American public opinion, and I would say increasingly Republican public opinion.
Yes, I do see that happening. Let's go to one more House race before we hit the Senate. Will Hurd struggled to retain his Texas 23 seat, and if I remember correctly, Beto wouldn't even endorse the Democrat, and that might have helped Hurd, his buddy, out a little bit. And now that the charismatic Black former CIA officer is leaving the House, what are the odds in this race of the Republicans retaining this district? It looks like a tough district for Republicans. Who's running, and is Will Hurd looking toward a 2024 presidential run?
Well, so in answer to your first question, the chances of Republicans holding this district, it might be quite low. It is actually considered to be the third most likely Republican-held district to flip to the Democrats. Now, some context is needed. Will Hurd is now the only Black Republican in the House. Tim Scott is the only Black Republican in the Senate. But it's worth noting that he was one of 3 Republicans who were reelected, who held seats in 2016 that voted for Hillary Clinton. And in the midterms in 2018, he was the only one of those 3 that won re-election. The other 2 were John Culberson in Texas 7th, which was in the suburbs of Houston, and Pete Sessions, who held a district in the suburbs of Dallas. And both of them lost re-election to Democratic challengers. Now, Will Hurd faced Gina Ortiz-Jones. His district is stretches from San Antonio across the border to just outside El Paso. And he faced the same Democrat who's running this year. And he was actually one of the few Republicans to hold town halls during 2018. And again, while the other 2 lost, he won by a 0.5 percentage point margin, largely because, I would argue, he stayed in contact with his constituents. He built coalitions, and he worked by the sweat of his brow to retain that seat. That was a tough district to hold, and he managed to do it. He is now retiring, and he's built up an interesting record. He's, for example, most recently marched with the Black Lives Matter movement in San Antonio. But he's also voted in line with the president. He did criticize Trump's building of a border wall, as well as the ban on travel from majority Muslim countries. But he also voted against impeaching President Trump. And so in this race, Gina Ortiz-Jones, the Democrat, is running again. Republicans still have to pick their nominee. There's a runoff in July. Right now, it looks like the most likely candidate to win the Republican nomination is Tony Gonzalez. He is running a bit to the right of Will Hurd. He has a military background, and he's not running away from Trump, but he does have the endorsement of Congressman Will Hurd. And I would say that in many ways, like demographically, Gonzalez is a good fit for the district. Whether or not the campaign he's running is a good fit is a different story. But it'll be interesting to see how this district turns out. And again, this is considered to be the 3rd most likely district to flip to the Democrats now that Will Hurd is running. And the only reason why it's not number 1 is because there are 2 Republican-held districts in North Carolina that were where the maps were redrawn to make safe Democratic by the state Supreme Court. So those are going to definitely flip. And that's the only reason why Will Hurd's district is not number 1 on flippable for the Democrats.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. I forgot we had one more House race to talk about, and that's close to my district here. SC1, South Carolina 1, has Joe Cunningham against Nancy Mace. Tell us a little bit about the history of this district and what happened in 2018, and also what kind of a candidate Mace is, and whether Cunningham is stronger than Mace, or what's going on with this district.
Sure, but first of all, very quickly, I forgot a bit of a detail. I'm not sure what Will Hurd's presidential plans are in 2024. But if he ran and Tim Scott did not run, he'd have a pretty good lane to keep all to himself, which might give him an advantage. But to South Carolina won. So a bit of context is necessary. The incumbent from 1995 until 2002, and then from 2013 to 2018, was a guy named Mark Sanford. And he is an interesting figure. He was actually the only member of the House Freedom Caucus to be critical of, just to criticize Trump in any way. And that would ultimately play to his disadvantage. But before that, in between
he's
those,
he's a big deficit hawk, isn't
yeah,
he? He's worried about the spending.
Yeah, the national debt and the deficit are his big issues. But in between that, he was governor of the state for 8 years. He actually unseated an incumbent Democratic governor in 2002. And but the thing that really that I think made national news was in 2009 when he traveled to Argentina to commit an act of infidelity, and he got in trouble for that, but refused to resign. And
a lot on the Appalachian Trail, wasn't he?
Yeah, which Trump called the Tallahassee Trail, which I didn't know there was a trail in Florida, in northern Florida. But yeah, so a lot of people thought he was politically finished as a result of that. But when Tim Scott was appointed to the Senate by Nikki Haley in 2013, he ran for his old district and won. And although he was able to keep his seat for a couple terms, his criticism of Trump, like I said, the only member of the House Freedom Caucus to do so, did not win him any points with Republican voters. And he was unseated by a conservative activist who, by the way, was at one point also critical of Trump, Katie Arrington. And the big reason why Joe Cunningham, the Democrat, is a member of Congress today is a number of reasons. One, Katie Arrington made a critical misstep at one point in the campaign, saying initially she was for offshore drilling, but then backtracked. Now, this gives actually a sense as to how, contrary to what many people say, that all politics is national, I would say there's still a sense that all politics are local. Because although Republicans nationally love the idea of allowing drilling for oil offshore, even Republicans in South Carolina do not want that. And that was an issue that Joe Cunningham played hard. And it really worked for him. And this is, by the way, a Trump plus 13 district. So it was not anticipated that this would end with a Democratic victory. But because of the strength of the Democratic wave, he won. And that's what gives him the nickname of a wave baby in election Twitter circles. But it's going to be a tough district for Democrats to hold. He's voted mostly in line with Democrats. He did once break with the Democratic leadership to vote against a bill that would have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But he did vote to impeach Trump when those articles of impeachment came for a vote in the House. So he's running as a member of the Blue Dog.
He was one of the few that voted against the recent budget busting bill in the House that was $2.3 trillion or something. That bill to help Americans. That he said it was loaded with a lot of pork, and he voted against it. And that was about a month or so ago, I think.
Right. Also, he actually, as a way to win over crossover support, he pledged to not support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And in fact, he actually voted for a different Democrat to be Speaker. She managed to get in the Speaker anyway. It was just at a time when Trump was effectively using Nancy Pelosi as a House Minority Leader as a cudgel against incumbent Democrats. It didn't work, and now Nancy Pelosi is very popular within her own party. But Cunningham is now facing a really tough re-election fight. His race is considered a toss-up, but he's facing a really good Republican incumbent who was able to win outright. A Republican challenger who was able to win outright on the first round of voting. Nancy Mace. She has a lot going for her. She was actually, believe it or not, the 2014 Joe Reynolds.
Yeah, right.
Because she ran
against Lindsey.
Yeah, she ran against Lindsey Graham. Got 6% of the vote, so she didn't do as well as you. But she did. She's now running. after serving some time in the State House of Representatives, she is, by all intents and purposes, a conservative, despite what some on the right would say. She's pro-life. She is a single mother of two, and she's also the first woman to graduate from the Citadel University, and which is a military university, and which is a very notable accomplishment. And I would say that of the Republicans who decided to run against Joe Cunningham, she has the greatest potential of giving him a run for his money. And this is going to be a tough district for Democrats to hold. Many people think that while Democrats are absolute favorites to hold the House, Republicans might make some overall gains. And if that's the case, I could easily see this being as one of the districts that Democrats got lucky in 2018, but would not be able to win under normal circumstances. The district is very suburban, so if any district in South Carolina was flipping, it would have been this one, but it's still a Trump plus 13 district at the end of the day.
There's a lot of money flowing into this race, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. It has the potential to be one of the most expensive races in American history. I think that the current record holder was the 2017 special election in Georgia's 6th, which is in the Atlanta suburbs, and is a bit more competitive for Democrats. And I'd say that Democrats have a better chance of holding that district than in South Carolina 1.
All right, let's move on to the Senate, and let's head out on west to Montana. There's a race I'm interested in, Jonathan. There's already one Democratic senator in Montana, I believe Tester, and now Bullock, who is a Democratic governor in Montana and a former presidential candidate. He's thrown his hat in the ring. What is it about Montana? It always goes red for president, and Trump will have no problem winning this state, but it does seem to elect the odd Democrats out there.
The answer is that Montana has a strong tradition of ticket splitting. For example, while Trump won the state by 21% in 2016, Steve Bullock, the incumbent Democratic governor, won re-election by 3%. And who he won re-election against I would very much love to talk about. At the same time, the Attorney General of the time, Tim Fox, won re-election with 67% of the vote. So Montanans will split their tickets. And I would say it's the real exception to the emerging rule in American politics that many say that Americans don't split their tickets. They still do. And Montana is a big example of that. Now, Steve Bullock is a popular incumbent governor. And the fact that he got reelected in 2016 speaks not only to his popularity, but also to the Republican he ran against. The Republican he ran against is Greg Gianforte, who is currently the congressman from the at-large congressman from the House of Representatives. He won re-election, and he won in a special election, which was spectacular. The incumbent at the time, Ryan Zinke, was appointed as Trump's Interior Secretary, and when the special election was held, Greg Gianforte was the Republican nominee. The day before the election, he body slammed a reporter in his office, and that was a major controversy. But the truth is, by that point, most ballots had been cast, so he probably was able to win in spite of that. Then in 2018, he ran for re-election. He did win, probably because memory of this incident faded out from view, and he was able to win against arguably a strong Democratic incumbent. But at the same time, in that year, the Democrat, as you mentioned, John Tester, won re-election to a third term. So Democrats, unlike in North Dakota, in Indiana, and Missouri, and also in Florida, by the way, who did not know how to win re-election, John Tester and other Democrats know how to win in a state like Montana. And it is in that context that Steve Bullock is running for the Senate against Republican Steve Daines. And polls currently show him with a lead over the Republican incumbent. Now, it's not as rosy a picture as Democrats often point it, because Steve Bullock in most polls leads 46-39. Now that looks good. It's a 7-point advantage, but it's a low plurality of the vote. And if most of the undecideds ultimately break for Steve Daines, that could allow him to win. So if Steve Bullock is polling closer to 50%, then I would say he's probably in a better position. Now, in terms of how this race is looking, people are debating whether or not it's a toss-up or whether who has the advantage. I would say that if anyone has an advantage, I would say it's still going to be Steve Daines, the Republican incumbent, because at the end of the day, it's Montana.
Right.
But I could
It's
easily
a presidential year, and all those undecideds go in and they vote for Trump, and they wonder what to do. They might, vote Republican, correct?
right. So I could easily see someone. I could easily see Steve Daines running on Trump's coattails, but it's also possible that Steve Bullock could actually eke this out. And if any red state has the potential to elect a Democratic senator, it's probably Montana. It might be Kansas, but that we don't know enough information about that state to talk about that at all today. There's a primary has to take place. There's a lot happening there, but I think that's for another episode. But Steve Bullock is not the only Montana Democrat who could win in 2020, and I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Is that the governor's race you're talking about?
Yeah. It's the governor.
Gianforte running again for governor?
Yes, he's running for governor. It's actually, I would argue, we don't have to talk about this, too much, but Greg Gianforte, as I've talked about, this setup might be the best possible setup that the Democrats could have hoped for. It's an open race, but Democrats got the nominee that they wanted. They got the lieutenant governor, Mike Cooney, and they also got the Republican nominee that they wanted to face, Greg Gianforte. And and you can bet that Democrats are going to bring up this the body slamming incident again. And also, even before the body slamming incident, Greg Gianforte was the Republican nominee for governor in 2016 and lost to Steve Bullock. So you could easily see a situation where Democrats have the setup they wanted, but it's still an open race. I would say this is a toss-up, and it really could go either way.
All right. Well, that sounds great. It sounds like interesting races out in Montana. Let's move a little bit. We'll start to move toward the east. Let's move to Colorado and look at the primary. Hickenlooper seemed like he was a shoo-in, but for the Democrats as a nominee. And also, he looked assured of victory over Cory Gardner, who seems to be kind of weak, a state that seems to be turning bluer and bluer by the minute. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Colorado is a state that I often include with Kentucky in this race, in the sense that you have Democratic shoo-ins who now seem to be less and less of a shoo-in. But let's talk about Colorado, because that's the one you asked about. John Hickenlooper is the former governor of the state, and he is running off his popularity as governor against incumbent Republican Senator Cory Gardner. As you mentioned, Colorado is a blue trending state. Obama won it by 5.4% in 2012. It voted for Hillary Clinton by 4.9%. Now that sounds like it got redder, but relative to the rest of the nation, it got bluer, because Obama won nationwide by 4 points, Clinton only won nationwide by 2 points. So when you take into account an R+2 shift nationwide and an R+0.5 shift in Colorado, the state got bluer. And it elected a Democratic governor by a high single-digit margin in 2018. And by all accounts, Colorado has the demographics of a blue trending state. And on top of that, Republican incumbent Cory Gardner is not popular. He has voted in line with Trump, and Democrats are using that as a cudgel. But interestingly enough, a number of Democrats who were thought to run for this race did not run. Like Chrysanta Duran, who's the former Speaker of the Colorado House, was thought to be a frontrunner for the nomination, but she did not run for the Senate. She made the decision to run against a sitting Democratic Congresswoman, which flamed out spectacularly, and she's no longer in contention. So it's because of that John Hickenlooper had the big opening to run, and he looked like a shoo-in, but not so much in these closing days, because he's gotten into trouble with the Colorado Ethics Commission over campaign donations, and he's very recently a video was unearthed of him making a joke about Black people being transported to America as slaves, which he has apologized for, but doesn't look great. And so, while like I said, he's definitely a shoo-in until this point, but right now, I would say this is completely up in the air. It's quite possible that the progressive in this race, Democrat Andrew Romanoff, has an opening to snatch the Democratic nomination away from Hickenlooper. And one could make the argument that with the current woes that Hickenlooper has faced, Romanoff, despite his progressive leanings, might be a better candidate against Cory Gardner. Because if Hickenlooper's a nominee, Cory Gardner now has a lot more attack information to use in his ads. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this Senate race turns out. And I would argue that Kentucky is in a similar way. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Let's segue right to Kentucky from Colorado. We got a similar situation. Amy McGrath, a brilliant resume you might want to talk about, but she's struggled as a candidate. She hasn't found her footing yet. And now Booker seems to be lifted up by the Black Lives Movement. And maybe you can talk about this race and McGrath's troubles.
Right. So I think that, like with all races, we need to have some context. The last Senate race in Kentucky featured the Democratic mayor of Lexington, Jim Gray, versus Republican incumbent Rand Paul. Jim Gray, following off a 14-point loss in this Senate race, ran for a competitive House district that he won in that Senate race that voted for Trump, namely the 6th district, which is where Lexington is located. Surprisingly enough, he lost the Democratic primary to Amy McGrath, who was who is an Air Force fighter and who ran a strong challenge against Republican Congressman Andy Barr. But at the very end of the 2018 midterms, by the end of the night, Andy Barr came out with a 3.1 percentage point win, about a 10,000 point win over McGrath. It's just Trump won it by 650-641. It was just too red for Democrats to really be able to make a play. Now, following off the heels of that loss, she is now running for the Senate, and she was widely considered to be the favorite for the Democratic nomination. But in the last few weeks, it seems like the progressive. I should first of all say that Amy McGrath is running, is trying to be the crossover support kind of candidate. She's talked about how Mitch McConnell, is obstructing everything, and that she would be a better senator to work with President Trump, who is popular in Kentucky. But she is now seeing the momentum with Charles Booker, who's the progressive in this race. He has racked up endorsements from notable people, including the former Democratic Secretary of State, Allison Lonergan Grimes, who is, by the way, the DSCC endorsed candidate, bucking the DSCC this time and endorsing Charles Booker. By the way, Lonergan Grimes was actually the nominee against Mitch McConnell in 2014. I thought I'd add that bit of context. But anyway, like Colorado, it's another example of a race where the Democratic nominee was a shoo-in, but now seems to be completely up in the air. The difference, however, is while Colorado looks very favorable for the Democrats, regardless of who the nominee is, whoever wins the Democratic nomination in Kentucky will likely be the sacrificial lamb against Mitch McConnell. Because while polls do show that Mitch McConnell is unpopular, it's Kentucky. Democrats, there is some vote splitting in Democratic Senate races and as well as for Trump, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be nearly enough to be able to take on McConnell.
Didn't we just have a Democratic governor in Kentucky?
Right. You could argue that there is a difference in state level races as opposed to federal races. Right. But even then, Matt Bevin was also very unpopular. The Republican governor governed as the kind of person who would sound really great, make sound bites that would sound really great on conservative talk radio and in DC, but not with Kentucky voters.
And that Democrat only won by a sliver, didn't he?
Right. He only won by a sliver. Despite the fact that Matt Bevin, the incumbent, railed against teachers unions, and although Kentuckians are culturally conservative, they love their public school teachers. So that is almost rule number one if you are running as a politician in Kentucky. Do not attack teachers. But anyway, even despite of that, Andy Beshear only barely won.
So what's your feeling on this race? Do you think McGrath is going to pull it out, or do you think Booker is got the bull by the horns?
It could be the momentum is with Booker, but I would say McGrath, as of this point, might still be ahead. So it's going to be frustrating because this Tuesday, Kentuckians are going to the polls, but we might not know the results until the following Tuesday, because there was a agreement said that counties would be allowed to withhold their results as late as the following Tuesday on June 30th. And the two biggest counties in the state and the two most Democratic counties in the state have taken them up on that offer. And I don't think you're going to be able to project a winner in that Senate race without a full third of the vote out, as well as the two counties with the most Democratic votes. So it's going to be a while until we find out how this race has gone.
All right, now we'll move into liberal circles, and we'll go out to Massachusetts, and we got longtime Congressman Markey, who's senator now, against another Kennedy. And it's kind of an advertisement for term limits, in my opinion. We got Markey, who's been there since 1977, and now we have Kennedy, who is heir to the Kennedy, political fortunes and political families in American politics. What are your views on this race? Who's going to win? Is there some bad blood here? Is it new against the old, or what? What are the actual policy differences between these liberal lions?
There's not that much policy difference between Markey and Kennedy. Really, arguably the only thing that's really different about them is their age and their longevity. Ed Markey has actually been in Congress since the 1970s. Whereas Joe Kennedy was elected to Congress in 2012, he's been there for less than a decade, as opposed to Markey, who's been there for more than 4 decades. So that's really the dividing line between those two. They vote pretty much the same. And in terms of dynasty politics, I would argue that it's really only dynasty politics on one side. It's the Kennedys who have been in politics for a long time. I'm only really aware of one Markey, and his name being Ed. So, right.
Maybe, but I mean, he has been there since I was a kid of 11, and I'm a 54-year-old man now. I mean, sometimes you got to wonder, are these politicians really serving us, or are they just getting reelected?
Right. It's also worth interesting to note that that they both have cross sections of support among Democrats. For example, while Ed Markey has the endorsement of Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, who represents Trump plus 1 district in northwestern Illinois and who is in a leadership position in the among House Democrats, he also has the endorsement of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So that really demonstrates the cross support that Ed Markey has. And I would argue that, and I would also point out, notice, Joseph Kennedy has a similar cross appeal of support. Now, in terms of who's favored, the polls have shown for a while that Joe Kennedy is in the lead, but there's still at least a couple months before this primary. Anything can change. So I wouldn't count Markey out at this point, but I would argue if there's any Senate election where the incumbent has the potential to lose in a primary, which would be the first time that happened since 2012 when Dick Lugar lost to Richard Murdoch in Indiana, it would be Markey versus Kennedy. Right.
What was Joe Kennedy's reason for running against him? I mean, if you're running for that seat and you want to pull out an incumbent, what's your reason for running against him?
I would argue because it's political opportunism. He's
pure ambition, huh?
Yeah, he's young. He has a long political future ahead of him. He could arguably be a candidate for president in late this decade or early the next one.
Right.
So of course, if he sees an opportunity to take a higher office, he's going to pounce on it.
All right. Well, we've reached the end. Do you want to go into quirky election footnotes, or do you want to discuss another race? What do you have in mind?
Well, I guess there's one more I would like to talk about, and it would definitely be Alabama, because Alabama is there's a lot of recent history in this seat that is just interesting to watch. So a bit of context: this seat was held by Republican Jeff Sessions until 2016. Jeff Sessions made a name for himself by opposing illegal immigration vocally. And a fun fact about him, his speechwriter for a long time was Stephen Miller, who currently works in the Trump White House. So Stephen Miller, so Jeff Sessions and Trump have a lot in common, and I guess it's no surprise that Jeff Sessions.
He was one of the first known politicians, senators, to come out in favor of Trump, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was actually the first U.S. senator to endorse him, which gave him a lot of credibility with many establishment Republicans, and it's really because of that Trump tapped him to be the Attorney General of the United States. And
we know where loyalty brings you with Donald Trump, don't we? There's always an end game.
Exactly. Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation, and Trump never said a nice thing about him since. And so, but when he was appointed, there's a lot I have to talk about here. The governor of the state at the time, Robert Bentley, appointed the Attorney General, Luther Strange, to the seat, who is in the midst of investigating Governor Bentley for an extramarital affair. And then when that came out, Bentley resigned and was replaced by Kay Ivey. So Luther Strange was appointed because of political corruption. That is without a question. But Trump is not the only one who has experience in quashing investigations. But that appointment to Attorney General for Jeff Sessions triggered a special election, which took place later that year. In the primary, Trump and the Senate leadership endorsed Luther Strange, but the party leadership bucked both of them and endorsed and nominated Roy Moore. And Roy Moore has a very colorful history. He was twice elected to the Alabama Supreme Court as Chief Justice. He was removed twice from the Alabama Supreme Court. The first time was when he defied a ruling by a federal district court to remove a display of the Ten Commandments at the state capitol. And then in 2016, he was removed again, this time for refusing to obey the United States Supreme Court ruling that Alabama had to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. He actually defied it in the most spectacular way. He ordered the state to not issue any marriage licenses. So he was removed for that, and it is in that context that he ran for the Senate as a controversial candidate, but Republicans did not care. Then in October of 2017, after the nomination had been chosen, the Me Too thing happened. Then a month into that, the allegations came out that Roy Moore had tried to, as a 38-year-old person, tried to get in bed with teenagers. Right. And that he was even banned from the Gadsden Mall because of his soliciting of, I can't even say it.
Some great Republican candidates, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. But Trump went hard for him anyway. He actually campaigned in Pensacola, Florida for Roy Moore, just outside of Mobile. I have no idea why he campaigned for an Alabama Republican in Florida, but I don't know. But
so now we have Jeff Sessions and
just really quickly, the Democrat for this race was, I have a lot to say, was Doug Jones, who has also a very interesting history of his own. He was a prosecutor in the early 2000s against a Ku Klux Klan member who had bombed a church in the 1960s, and who was only prosecuted in the early 2000s for this case. That is really, I think, for many people, when he came to national prominence. And he ran for the Senate. He ran for the Senate, and in spite of the political lean of Alabama, but because of the accusations against Roy Moore and everything else about him weighing him down, he eked out the win and immediately became a top target for Republicans. Jeff Sessions, as you're going to say, is running for his old job, but he's facing tough headwinds because the President of the United States does not like him. In the primary in 2000 and earlier this year, he came second in the runoff to the former coach of Auburn University, Tommy Tuberville. And polls have shown Jeff Sessions trailing Tuberville, and Tuberville has the endorsement of President Trump. And to be honest, Jeff Sessions' attempt to regain the support of of Republican voters has been painful and sad to watch. Just recently,
It's embarrassing.
he recently criticized. There was a vote in Congress where Republicans and Democrats bucked President Trump and voted to advance a bill to rename the 10 bases in the military bases in the United States that are named after Confederate soldiers. Doug Jones was one of the people who voted for that bill, and Jeff Sessions ripped him. He basically defended Confederate monuments. He thinks that would be the thing that would win over Republican voters in Alabama. And the only reason why he's doing that is because he's down in the polls. Although I saw a source saying that maybe he's closing the gap. He might actually benefit from the fact that the runoff was delayed 3.5 months because of COVID-19. But it'll still be interesting to see. I still think that Tuberville is favored to win the nomination. In many ways, you could argue that Tuberville has issues of his own, but he would at least be a fresh face if in terms of if he were the nominee. Because the truth is, Doug Jones has a steep climb ahead of him in order to be reelected. He won largely because Roy Moore's base did not turn out, and Doug Jones's base did turn out. That was the big factor. And it was really the perfect storm where he lost support among suburban whites, but it was the perfect storm. Everything went right for Doug Jones.
Mississippi has the largest black population in the country with a 40% black population, and it's odd that I don't see more room for African American legislators from that state, but there seems to be a stranglehold there from the old days, bad old days or good old days, however you want to call them, on the state politics.
Right. Although in Mississippi, the Democratic nominee for the Senate in 2018 special election was an African American. But basically, Mississippi is an interesting state where people vote along racial lines almost exclusively. Alabama is similar in that, but the difference is that the African American population is smaller, so it's harder to win as a Democrat. But like I said, 2017 was the perfect storm for Doug Jones. And one of the major factors will not be present in a presidential election. There will be full turnout. And I just don't think that Doug Jones, is going to be able to win enough crossover support to be able to eke out the win when Trump's base is fully turning out for him. So in terms of Republicans, I would personally think that Tuberville is a better pick just because he's a fresh face and he doesn't have a record, and he would be, again, a fresh face and would not have the baggage that Jeff Sessions has had. And maybe it could mean that someone like Tuberville could have a clean slate and could actually legislate for the good, like Doug Jones has done.
You think likely red?
I definitely think it's likely Republican.
Okay. All right. Well, we've finished all our races here. We got a couple of quirky election footnotes at the bottom here. Maybe you could describe to us a couple of things. In the presidential race in the Electoral College, we have these odd electors in Maine and Nebraska. Maybe you could, you always see this stripiness in those states, and a lot of times people don't know what that means and why it is, and maybe you could help us out there.
Sure. So most states elect presidents by having the winner of the statewide popular vote taking all of the electoral votes, as a lot of people know. Maine and Nebraska are the exception, where the winner of the statewide popular vote wins 2 electoral votes, and then the remaining ones are divvied out among the various congressional, or in this case, electoral districts. Now, in the case of most of these districts, they're safe for one party or the other. But in 2 of them, they're actually competitive. Maine's 2nd congressional district went for Obama by 9%, but in 2016 went for Trump by 10%. And it's looking like this time it's going to be really close. So Maine's 2nd congressional district is the kind of district that in an environment like the one we're seeing could easily go either way. And so you could easily see a situation which happened in 2016 where Joe Biden wins 3 out of 4 of Maine's votes, but Trump takes 1 of them because he does manage to eke out a win in the northern 2nd district, which is much more rural and is much more Trump friendly. Now in Nebraska, it's a bit of a different story. Nebraska is a safe Republican state, but the 2nd district is basically Omaha if we were naming congressional districts based on parliamentary names, they would be called Omaha Center. It's downtown Omaha and many of the suburbs. It was Trump +2 in 2016 after being Romney +7 in 2012. And in the 2008 iteration of this district, Obama actually flipped it. And so it gives you a sense of the potential for both Nebraska and for Maine to split their electoral delegation and not go entirely for one candidate. It's not always a guarantee to happen, but I would say that it's possible that at least one of those states might end up doing that this year.
So are these districts that both candidates should keep an eye on and probably put some TV ad space into?
Definitely. I would say that Nebraska's second is very much a toss-up. Maine's second congressional district might actually be a little bit better for Trump, but it'll still be very close.
Right. Now, tell me what happens. Unfortunately, in our system, we have a possibility of a tie in the Electoral College. Don't ask me why. And if a tie happens, then what occurs?
The House of Representatives picks the president, but not member by member. Instead, each state's House delegation gets one vote. So if representatives are voting on a pure party line basis, this assumes that no congressmen buck their parties and vote for the other candidate. Well, then you'd have whichever party has more congressmen in that state, their state vote would go to that party. And so currently, of the states, there are 26 where Republicans have a majority of that state's House delegation. There are currently, I believe, 23 where Democrats have a majority. And then there's one which is split down the middle. So
now, when would they vote? They'd vote in the current iteration, or would this come January 3rd when the new Congress people are elected, or is it the class right now that would do it?
It would probably be the next one after they've ceremonially verified that no one reached 270 electoral votes. But to be very honest, given in terms of and now to be honest, who would benefit from a tie? I would say that Trump would, just because of the current makeup of the delegation, and also really given the current political realities, if it's coming down to a 269 vote, where the House has to decide, it's almost certain that the Republicans have a majority of the House delegations. Just given the current political realities.
Well, that will really make everybody happy, won't it?
It definitely will.
All right, Jonathan, it's been so great talking to you. Any last footnotes you want to tell us about, or any quirky election news?
Just that I would definitely want to do this with you again. I have a lot of things about Pennsylvania that I would love to talk about with you on a future episode.
Well, I'll be on the ship come August 2nd, but maybe we'll get a July episode in.
Very much looking forward to that, Joe. Really great seeing you.
All right. Thanks talking to you, Jonathan. I hope everybody gets a kick out of our election episode.
Yep. I really hope they do, especially election Twitter. Anyway, have a great day, Joe.
All right. Thanks.